The heavy oak door of Wycliffe & Sons creaked open as I stepped into the office, my footsteps muted by the thick Persian carpet. The air smelled of old books, leather, and something faintly metallic. A storm had just passed over London, and the windows still rattled with occasional gusts of wind. Thomas was already seated across the room, one leg bouncing impatiently. He barely spared me a glance when I entered. His expression was a strange mixture of grief and something sharper, something less noble. Mr. Wycliffe, a thin, grey-haired man with gold spectacles perched precariously on his nose, stood behind his grand mahogany desk. In his hands, he held 2 envelopes. One thick, one thin. "Thank you both for coming," he said, voice roughened by years of smoke and secrets. "Your father's final wishes must now be addressed." I nodded. Thomas grunted. The room seemed to tighten around us as Mr. Wycliffe broke the seal of the thicker envelope and began to read. His voice was steady but somber. "To my beloved children," he started, and for a moment I felt a pang in my chest. "I leave my estate and all my worldly possessions to my daughter Alice Carter." The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Thomas stiffened. His hands curled into fists on his knees. "That is absurd," Thomas balked, standing abruptly. "There must be some mistake." Mr. Wycliffe adjusted his glasses. "There is no mistake, Mr. Carter. Your father's instructions were explicit." I sat frozen, a sick feeling twisting in my stomach. I did not understand. Thomas had always been the golden child, the favorite. This did not make sense. Mr. Wycliffe then picked up the second envelope, the thinner one. His eyes met mine over the rim of his spectacles. "This," he said, "is for you alone, Miss Carter." He handed it to me, and as I took it, I noticed how cold his fingers were. Or maybe it was my own hands trembling. Thomas stormed from the room without another word. The door slammed behind him, making the portraits on the walls shudder. Left alone with Mr. Wycliffe, I stared down at the envelope in my lap. My name was written on it in my father's unmistakable hand. I hesitated, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. "What is in it?" I asked. Mr. Wycliffe's mouth tightened. "Answers," he said simply. "But be warned, Miss Carter. Some truths do not offer comfort." The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, feeling the edges press against my side like a hidden blade. As I stepped back out into the gray afternoon, the first drops of a new rain began to fall. I had inherited more than an estate. I had inherited a secret. The taxi pulled up to the house with a groan of its tired engine. I stared out of the window at the building that was now mine, though it felt more like an accusation than a gift. It was a Victorian mansion, 4 stories high, its red brick facade blackened with soot and rain. Ivy crept along the walls like dark veins. The iron gate screeched as I pushed it open, the hinges stiff from years of disuse. The front door yielded reluctantly, opening with a shudder. Inside, the air was stale with dust and time. Shadows clung to the corners like cobwebs. I hesitated on the threshold, the envelope heavy in my pocket, before stepping inside. My footsteps echoed across the marble floor as I moved through the grand hall. A chandelier hung above me, draped with thick layers of dust. Portraits lined the walls, their painted eyes following me with silent judgment. In the drawing room, the fireplace was cold and empty. I ran my fingers along the mantel, stirring up a thin cloud of gray. Something crunched underfoot. I glanced down to see the remains of a broken photograph frame. Inside, the photo had faded almost to nothing, but I could just make out the shape of a little girl. Me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. It was not just the emptiness of the house that unsettled me. It was the feeling that I was not truly alone. In the study I found the first real clue. On the desk, beneath a cracked glass paperweight, lay an old leather-bound journal. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. With trembling hands, I opened it. At first it seemed innocuous. Notes about business dealings, inventories of the library, records of the wine cellar. But as I turned the pages, the entries grew darker, more frantic. Mentions of strange visitors. Late-night disturbances. An unnamed fear that seemed to stalk the house. And then, one sentence, underlined twice in thick black ink. "Trust no one. Not even your own blood." A floorboard creaked above me. My heart leapt into my throat. I snapped the journal shut, my ears straining in the silence. The house seemed to be holding its breath. Slowly, I backed out of the study and into the hall. The shadows seemed to shift as I moved, pressing in closer. Something was very wrong in this house. And I was beginning to understand that whatever secrets my father had buried, they were not content to stay hidden. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay in the grand bedroom, the ancient bed groaning under my weight. The curtains hung heavy and still, blocking out the outside world. The only light came from the flickering fire I had managed to coax to life in the old hearth. The journal lay on the nightstand, its presence almost accusing. I tried to distract myself by reading, but every few minutes my attention would snap back to the silence pressing against the windows. Or was it silence? I strained my ears. There it was again. A low, whispering sound, like voices murmuring behind the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to come from within the house itself, from the very stones and wood that surrounded me. I rose from the bed, pulling a shawl tightly around my shoulders. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, but curiosity won out. I followed the whispers down the hall. The house was different at night, the shadows deeper, the walls seeming to pulse with a life of their own. As I reached the library, the whispers stopped. The door was ajar, swaying slightly as if it had just been disturbed. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh escaped from the darkness within. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The smell of old paper and leather was overwhelming. Rows upon rows of books towered above me. Moonlight filtered in through the high windows, casting long skeletal shadows across the floor. And then I saw her. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, stood at the far end of the library. She wore a faded white dress, and her hair hung in damp, matted curls. Her back was to me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Hello," I whispered. The girl turned slowly. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets of darkness. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came out. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. The girl began to walk towards me, her movements jerky and unnatural, as if pulled by invisible strings. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps thundering through the silent house. Behind me, the whispering started again, louder, angrier. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, slamming the door shut and throwing the heavy bolt across it. For the rest of the night, I sat curled on the bed, watching the door, listening to the whispers that never truly faded. The house was alive. And it wanted something from me. The following morning was bleak. The sunlight that should have streamed through the windows was muted, swallowed by a thick, unyielding mist. The house groaned and creaked as if restless from the night's events. I needed answers. I recalled the journal, the missing pages, and the whispers that still seemed to linger at the edge of my hearing. There had to be something more, something hidden. That was when I remembered the attic. I found the door at the end of the corridor, tucked behind a heavy velvet curtain. It was small, almost invisible, as if deliberately concealed. My fingers hesitated at the handle, but the pull of curiosity was too strong to resist. The attic stairs were narrow and steep, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew colder with every step, sharp with the scent of mildew and something more metallic. Something like blood. At the top, the attic sprawled out before me. A vast, dark cavern filled with old furniture, broken mirrors, and dusty trunks. And then at the far end, partially covered by a moth-eaten sheet, I saw it, a large painting, framed in tarnished gold. I approached it slowly, heart pounding. Pulling the sheet away, I gasped. The portrait depicted a young woman who looked exactly like me. Same dark hair, same pale complexion, same solemn, haunted eyes. I stumbled back, confusion and fear clawing at my mind. Beneath the portrait, a brass plaque bore a name. Alice Penrose, 1873 to 1892. Alice. The name from the journal. The name the whispers had called out in the dark. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the frame. The moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, the room around me seemed to warp and bend. A shriek of wind tore through the attic, sending papers and dust into a violent whirl. The mirrors cracked. The floorboards shuddered. And from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was Alice. Her white dress was stained and torn, her face a mask of sorrow and rage. Her mouth moved, but no sound emerged, only the same chilling whisper that had haunted me all night. "Find me," she seemed to say. Remember. Before I could react, the attic floor gave a sudden violent lurch, and I was thrown backward, tumbling down the stairs in a blur of terror and pain. When I hit the bottom, the world went dark. When I awoke, I was sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, my body aching from the fall. The house was unnervingly silent. For a moment, I wondered if I had dreamt it all. The portrait, the whisper, Alice, but the cold dread still clung to my skin like a second layer. I sat up slowly, my head pounding. There, resting beside me on the dusty floorboards, was the journal. But something was different. The missing pages were no longer missing. I flipped through it frantically, my heart racing. The torn sections had been restored, now filled with handwritten entries that trembled with urgency and fear. Each page told the story of Alice Penrose, a young woman trapped in a life she did not choose, hidden away by a family terrified of her strange abilities. A family that believed she was cursed, that she could glimpse into the future, that she could command spirits. They locked her away, starved her of love, of life, until despair consumed her. Until one night, she vanished. The journal spoke of rituals, of doors between worlds, of a binding that had gone terribly wrong. As I read, I realized something far more terrifying. Alice had not vanished. Alice had been trapped, bound to the house, waiting. And somehow, by touching her portrait, I had broken part of that binding. I had set her free. A sharp knock echoed through the house, startling me to my feet. I turned towards the sound, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. Another knock, louder this time, from the parlor. I crept towards it, every instinct screaming to run the other way. The door creaked open by itself. Inside, the parlor was dark, except for a small circle of light where a single candle burned atop a table. And there, sitting in an old armchair, was Alice. She smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a human one. Her eyes were black voids, endless and hungry. "Alice," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "No," she corrected, her voice like the wind through dead leaves. "You are Alice now." The candle flickered violently, casting long monstrous shadows against the walls. And in that moment I understood. This house had never been abandoned. It had been waiting for me. I stumbled back from the parlor, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Alice, or whatever she had become, remained seated, her empty gaze following me without moving her head. I had to get out. I had to leave the house. I turned and bolted for the front door. But as I grabbed the handle, it melted away into the wood, becoming part of the wall, as if it had never existed. Panicked, I ran through the corridors, trying every window, every exit. All gone. The house had closed itself around me. Trapped. Panting, I leaned against a crumbling wall. Then I saw it. A mirror. Tall, cracked, leaning precariously against the hallway. Its surface shimmered oddly, like a pool of black water. I approached cautiously, heart pounding. Reflected in the mirror, I could see the hallway behind me. But something was wrong. In the reflection, the walls were pristine, the air was golden, and at the end of the hall I saw myself. Or rather, a version of myself. Smiling. Inviting. I lifted a trembling hand to touch the mirror. My reflection did the same. But just as our fingers should have met, the reflection grinned wider, far too wide to be human. And the mirror cracked violently, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. From the cracks, black tendrils of mist began to seep out, twisting and writhing in the air. One wrapped itself around my wrist, ice-cold and solid as iron. I screamed and yanked my arm back, stumbling away from the mirror. The mist slithered along the walls, hungry and sentient. Behind me, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Slow. Measured. Getting closer. "Alice," the voice crooned sweetly. I ran. I darted into room after room, the house now a labyrinth of shifting corridors and endless staircases. Everywhere, the mist was spreading. In every mirror, every window, the reflection of my grinning double waited, tapping on the glass, beckoning. My mind reeled. Was I still Amelia? Was I already becoming Alice? The thought gnawed at me with sharp, invisible teeth. Finally, I stumbled into a room that seemed untouched by the corruption. At its center stood a pedestal. And atop it, a small, delicate music box, its key already wound. I hesitated only a second before reaching out. The moment my fingers brushed it, the box began to play a haunting lullaby, and the mist recoiled, screeching. It hated the sound. I clutched the music box to my chest, the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. But I knew it would not last long. Alice, or whatever force she had unleashed, was coming. And there was no one left to save me. The music box's melody grew fainter, the winding mechanism slowing down. I clutched it tighter, but the mist around me began to creep closer once again, eager to snatch me into its freezing grasp. There was no time left. I had to find a way out. Racing through the decaying halls, I spotted something at the end of a long corridor. A door. Unlike the others, this one was untouched by rot, shining a deep rich mahogany under the flickering lights. Hope flared in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe I could escape. I ran. Behind me, the mist surged like a living tide. From the shadows, hands clawed at the walls, and faces pressed against the broken windows, their mouths stretched in silent screams. The music box slipped once from my grasp, almost falling. I caught it just in time, heart pounding so loudly it deafened me. As I neared the door, a figure stepped out from the mist. Alice. Or the thing wearing her face. She stood between me and salvation, head tilted unnaturally to one side, her hair dangling like wet ropes. Her mouth moved, but no words came. Only a high-pitched ringing filled the air. I hesitated. One wrong move, and she would have me. The music box, now almost silent, trembled in my hand. I closed my eyes, steeled myself, and lunged forward. Alice shrieked, a terrible sound that made the very air shudder. I barreled past her, feeling her icy fingers brush my arm, and threw myself against the door. It resisted at first. The mist wrapped around my ankles, dragging me back inch by inch. I kicked and clawed, desperate. And finally, with a splintering crack, the door swung open. A blinding white light poured through, washing over me, burning away the mist. I stumbled through, falling onto cold, hard stone. Gasping for breath, I looked up. I was no longer in the manor. Instead, I found myself in an endless field of mirrors, stretching into the horizon under a starless sky. Each mirror shimmered, showing a different version of me. Some smiling, some crying, some broken. And at the center of them all, standing tall and perfect, was a grand mirror, its surface as black as night. From its depths, I heard my own voice whispering, calling me. I staggered to my feet, the music box dead in my hands. There was nowhere left to run. The final confrontation awaited. I had to face what I had become, or be lost forever. I stood before the towering black mirror, its surface pulsing like a living heart. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run. But there was nowhere else to go. The mist had vanished. The house was gone. It was only me. And my reflection. Slowly, the mirror rippled, and a figure stepped out. It was me. But different. This other me smiled, a smile too wide, too sharp, stretching impossibly across her face. Her eyes gleamed with a cruel light. Without a word, she advanced, each step echoing across the endless plain of mirrors. I stepped back instinctively, bumping into another mirror. It shattered on contact, the shards dissolving into nothingness. The other me laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You left us behind, she whispered, voice twisting like a blade. You forgot who you were. The music box, still clutched in my hand, vibrated weakly. I lifted it, desperate, but my reflection only tilted her head mockingly. You can't save yourself, she hissed. You don't deserve to. I closed my eyes. Memories flooded me, not just of the manor or Alice, but of long-forgotten days. Loneliness. Fear. The way I had buried pieces of myself just to survive. The mirrors around me began to crack, one by one, each shattering with a deafening scream. The ground trembled beneath my feet. The other me lunged, and I did the only thing I could. I opened the music box. From its broken gears, a single pure note escaped, a note so clear, so raw, it cut through the darkness like a blade. The figure recoiled, her smile twisting into a snarl. The mirrors exploded outward, sending shards spinning through the void. I ran. Past memories. Past regrets. Straight into the heart of the black mirror. The world folded in on itself, a whirl of sound and light and shadow. And then, silence. I lay on soft grass, the scent of damp earth filling my nose. Above me stretched a blue sky, clouds drifting lazily. The music box lay beside me, cracked but whole. I sat up slowly. The manor was gone. The field of mirrors was gone. But deep inside, a part of me knew, they were never truly gone. They would always be waiting. In the cracks of my mind. In the quiet moments. In the forgotten places where reflections danced. Waiting for me to look again.